You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we focus on financial strategies for building a profitable food business. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan. Today on the podcast, I am joined by Sarah Marshall. She is the founder and creator of Marshall's Haute Sauce, author of Preservation Pantry, Modern Canning from Root to Top and Stem to Core, and co-host of the Meaningful Marketplace podcast. Sarah founded her good food business in 2011, sourcing ingredients from local farmers, producing her sauces by hand, and building relationships through farmers markets and community events. From an early stage, Sarah considered the numbers, what role she wanted to play within her business, and the role she wanted the business to play in her life. Staying true to that vision, continually checking in with herself and her numbers, Sarah has been able to create a profitable food business that truly brings her joy. And 11 years later, she's still working with local farmers and making her sauce by hand. I am so honored to have Sarah Marshall as a guest to share her story with you and hopefully encourage you to build the business of your dreams. Without further ado, let's get to it. Sarah Marshall, welcome to the Good Food CFO podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited that you are here. I want to share with our listeners that you and I met a few years ago. I can't remember if it was 2018 or 2019 at the Intense conference that the Farmers Market Pros put on every year in San Diego. And I had kind of followed your business and you for a couple of years since. And I had gotten my perception was that Marshall's Hot Sauce was a brand and a business that you were growing very intentionally and with like specific purpose. And I always admired you from afar. And then we reconnected in person this year at the Intense conference. And you did a talk where you shared that indeed you were super intentional about how you went about building your business and you continue to do that. So I'm so happy you agreed to come onto the podcast and share more about that, because something we say a lot here is that I want business owners to build their businesses on their own terms. And it seems like that's what you've done.
I hope that's what I've done. I think that it's always changing. And that's one of the things I talked about at the conference. And one thing, I think we did meet in 2018 at the Intense conference. And I have been part of the conference, I think, every year. And it's one of my favorite things. So first off, for anyone who is listening, if they have anything to do with farmers markets at all, I would say that both the conference and the podcast that they do is really helpful. And, I wanted to come here today just because if my story helps anybody out at all, then that's what I want. And so even when I talked at the conference, I think that was my goal there, is that everybody's story is so different. And so I kind of refrain from telling people what they should and shouldn't do, because I have no idea really, but if I can just share my experience and it helps people, then I'm down.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree with what you said and echo that the conference is really special. It's really wonderful. And, I've been sort of removed from the farmers market world for a few years as I was building my business. So getting back to that community this year just reconnected me to my why and my purpose. And I was like, yes, I'm so, so glad that that community exists. And the podcast is amazing as well. So definitely check that out. We'll put links in the show notes in case people are new to that organization.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I love to go to it, even is that, I go to present every year, but I feel like I get just as much out of it just by being in that environment and being around those people. And just, it helps you kind of focus on all of the things that you do want to be intentional about. Because sometimes I think just as small business owners, or even market managers, whatever your job is that you do, you get like wrapped up in the job part. And it just gives you a moment of pause to like really think about what you want to do, how you want to do it. So I always recommend for anyone, anytime you can take a class or go to a conference and it has you take a minute out of your everyday to like think about that stuff. I try to do it as much as possible. I do the farmers market conference often, but I also try to do some kind of learning session. We have a lot of small business classes and things in place in Portland. I'm not sure if it's like that everywhere, but especially since the pandemic, we have a lot more available to people like me. And it always just helps to help me focus on other things I want to do.
Yeah, the community aspect and the getting out of your daily routine, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it can be really inspiring. So I want to go back to the beginning
sure.
of Marshall's Hot Sauce. So can you tell us perhaps what you were doing before you started the business? What year did you start the business? Sort of those beginning details?
Yeah, definitely. So I started the business in 2011, and I was a social worker at the time. I ran nonprofit group homes here in Portland, and I just got really interested in food, and that sort of came from my job in that. I was in charge of the programs, but also the food that came in and out of the program. So what the kids in the group homes were going to eat, and then I did some family group work. And so it just sort of became this thing that started to happen while I was in that program where I got really into the food that the kids were eating. I got really into teaching families how to cook at home and canned food that was coming from the food bank. And I started working closely with the farmers that were donating food to the food bank. And that sort of led me into this farmers market world and food world. And I wanted to kind of take a break from social work. So I'd done it, 10 years working in different programs throughout the city. And so I thought that I would start this business. And I took a class before I did anything. I took a business class to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. Because at first I thought, oh, maybe I'll do a food cart. Like I've been making all these sauces and canning them, and I could give people food. And, food carts were just kind of starting. This was 2000, probably 10. They were just sort of starting to be big in the city. But, as I looked at that, we also live in a city that's very wet and cold, and I don't really like to be wet and cold. And so I was like, no, that's not what I wanted to do. And of course, I didn't have a lot of money. And so it was like I couldn't open a restaurant or, anything like that. And it was really just this idea of, well, I'm making these sauces that I'm canning and people are into them and people are telling me they're going to buy them. So maybe I'll just kind of see what that looks like. So I did a business plan in that class to figure that out. And in Oregon, it's very easy to get certified to do things in your home. It's called a cottage license now, but when I started, it was called a domestic kitchen license. And so if you don't have pets, you can start cooking out of your home. You come in and get certified, and they give you these parameters that you can do. But I lived in a really tiny home, so I had a 700 square foot house, and that's sort of where I started. And I just, even at that time, as I was figuring out the business and starting the business, I thought that I would kind of go back to social work and that I was just sort of trying this cool thing out. And I was going to like the farmers market and craft fairs. And my very first show was at the Eagles Lodge, which was just like a, just very community aspect where if I sold like 10 bottles of sauce, I was stoked. I was like, this is great. This is so cool. But I didn't really have plans necessarily to do it as a job. But then I did. I mean, I realized how much I loved it and that it's what I wanted to do because I really felt like I was interacting with the community in this awesome way. Like I was at the farmers markets, I was around all the people that were bringing me all this joy. I was making people super excited to learn about food and cooking. And so I just decided I wanted to make it my full-time gig. So I went back to the program. It was Mercy Corps Northwest is who I took the first business class. And then I figured out how much money I needed to make to not have a job.
Yeah. So important.
Yeah.
To anyone currently with a full-time or part-time job that is supplementing their income and you want to quit that job and be an entrepreneur full-time, do that math, do that work. So smart.
And that's the thing about, what I love about you is that you're really great at that kind of stuff. And what I am not good at is math and numbers. I'm good at being creative. I'm good at writing recipes. Those kinds of things kind of come naturally to me, but the math part doesn't. So luckily right away, just from taking that class before I even started the business, my instructor was like, find the thing that you're the worst at and have someone else do it for you.
Wow. I love that.
And I was like, oh, great. Totally. I need an accountant and I need a bookkeeper and I need someone that is, that I can go to when I want to start something new, because I'm not good at making those decisions. And I knew that that would be definitely the hardest area and where I would make the most mistakes. And I think that that's totally true. But what I also want people to hear is that that's sort of part of having a business. Unless you have a team of people, I think that it's sort of happens. So maybe you'll take an account you shouldn't have taken, or you'll pay for a service that it definitely, tanks your income or your money you have moving around. I think those things happen, and that's sort of what I want people to know and to hear. But I think there's also ways of avoiding some of that. And that is, having people like you, or taking a class and you have advisors, or just having advisors in general. Like, find someone who is really good at that stuff and then just talk to them about it first, if you can. But I think sometimes that's the thing that happens too for all of us. I don't think it matters if it's a big business or a small business, is that everything comes out of a conversation. So sometimes you're having a conversation and it sounds really good. And if you don't take the time to stop and pause and see what the numbers mean, then I think that's where people get into a lot of trouble. And especially with like taking on wholesale accounts and things like that. I think that really can be a scary thing to say no to people. But I think it's also something that needs to get talked about, that it's okay to do if it doesn't work for you.
Yeah. Going back to the class where you were talking about figuring out how much money you needed to make to not go back to your full-time job, or to be able to leave your full-time job. Did you also factor in at that time what it might cost you to run the business? So were you looking at like, here are what my costs are for the accountant, for the ingredients, maybe for the packaging, and also at the end of the day, this is the amount of money. So like, this is how much I need to sell and this is how much I need to have at the end of the day to make this work? Or kind of, can you talk about that process a little bit?
So I had to do it actually a couple different times. So that's the thing that, I think sometimes if people do a business plan or they're just starting, you'll do that. You'll do a business plan, you'll figure out numbers, but then like as you grow, and if you start to grow right away where you need to start having people working for you or a place that you're paying to rent, because originally I didn't have any of those things. It was just like me in my kitchen. My costs were really low. If I sold some sauce and could pay, for the stuff that I got, and like, I was hanging out with buddies at the farmers market, like it was all very easy.
Yeah.
But then once I started doing wholesale, and then needing to pay for a space and pay for a person, I had to kind of relook at things very quickly. And then I had to do it again. And I have to always keep doing it. I have to relook at things because, I went from not having a space that I was renting to having a space that I was renting. I went from needing to hire employees, deciding that a good decision to do that was to have my husband do it, because he was also in a social work job that he was kind of ready to leave and wasn't making very much money. So it was like, does it make more sense to pay someone the same amount of what you're making at your job, or just pay you? But then we were getting our insurance through him. So then we needed to figure out insurance. So I just think it's like this moving being. Your numbers are like this thing that always changes. And then like if there's big changes of who I'm selling to or who I'm buying from, we have to do it again. You have to like keep looking at it and seeing if things are working for you.
Yeah. Maybe it is obvious, but I think, and this was true for me when I owned my food business, some of us feel like I'm working really hard and this is going to work out. And I did the math in my head and everything's going to be fine. Or like you said before, like this is a new customer. And so I can't say no to this new customer, even though they want to pay me less than what I typically sell my sauce for, or what have you. So we sort of get into like a flow, or we feel that we don't have the time to slow down for a day or a couple of hours and rerun the numbers and see really what our potential outcomes are. So I'm really grateful that you're sharing that. It's a lesson I learned the hard way.
And I think what it's totally about is time. I think people don't take the time. We don't feel
Mhm.
like we have the time to make those decisions. So like, a good example for that is anytime I want to bring on a new product or do a new line, or I have an idea, which I always have ideas. That's what small business owners are full of them. But I'll always, before I do it, I'll say to my husband, hey, I think I'm going to take a class, because we have all these things where you can just enroll in it for like 6 weeks. I
Right.
think I'm going to take a class because I have this idea I'm working out in my head, but I need to make sure it's going to work and that it fits in with what we're doing. So, an example for that is I do these spice rubs now, and this is like
Oh,
one thing
awesome.
I wanted to talk with people about, because what I was looking at when I was doing that is that I had, we try to work on a no waste system where we're spending our money on this great organic produce, but then we try to use all of it. And that's
Right.
like what my cookbook is all about. And so, we incorporate it into the business, but I also have to figure out if that is going to be worth doing, because I am taking part of a sauce that I would normally maybe compost, where I'm straining out the seeds and spices because I don't want them to be in that sauce. But then I'm dehydrating them, powdering them, packaging them. So what I needed to figure out is if that time and money, even though it fits in with our values of saving everything, but is it worth it? And how can I make it worth it? Because I really wanted to do it, but I had to sit down and look at, okay, well, so what does my packaging size need to be? What can I package it in? Because we package in glass bottles and it's very expensive. And especially with the pandemic, glass bottles got even more expensive. So
Yeah.
I needed to figure out a different kind of packaging, which is why we went with this, craft paper, because the bottles made it so that it was like, no, I was like spending way more money. But if I wouldn't have taken the time to do that, I would have just done it in our glass bottles and, put it out there and started wholesaling it. And that was the other thing that I had to look at, was that I am doing this product, but I am not wholesaling it because I sell it just at the farmer's market. To wholesale it, I would be, again,
Yeah.
negative money. I would be spending more on producing the product than what people would pay me for it. Unless they were going to sell this little package for like $10, which they're
Right.
not. So.
Yeah. So something you said this year at the conference during the talk that I saw was that, and I'm totally paraphrasing here, so I'm sorry, but what is like in my brain is like, I did not want to be a wholesale business. And my ears perked up and I thought, "Oh, I'm so glad that she's saying that out loud." And it made me believe that there was a moment in time, perhaps as you were taking one of those first two classes, where you were like kind of doing what you just described for your sauces and saying, maybe doing some math and saying, okay, if I sell direct to consumer at a farmer's market, this is what my profit margins look like. And this is how many units I have to sell. And if I go wholesale, like this is what my reality looks like. So I talk with people every single day who are making these decisions of what channel do I want to be in, or what channel do I want to expand or grow into. So can you share sort of what that process looked like for you, and kind of how you came to the decisions you did for building and growing your business?
Yeah, so that is what I said at the conference, sort of. I've always been set up to do wholesale, and I do wholesale, but I do the wholesale accounts that work really well for us and
Mhm.
work really well for our accounts. So we sell really well in our local grocery stores because they already know us, they know our farmers. We do like specialty food grocery stores, so
Right.
maybe not something like Safeway, but in our world, we have stores like New Seasons, where they really support local vendors. And
Yeah.
so those are the stores that are great for us, because we also are able to go in and do demos. We're able to talk about why our product line is more expensive than other product lines, because we're sourcing from our local farmers, supporting local agriculture, and people understand that. So that works great for us. And I've always wanted to be in those stores, but for me to do bigger grocery stores and bigger wholesale accounts, really that's set up for somebody who has maybe a co-packer or a huge facility. It's very hard to do that for a small producer. And why I didn't want to grow the wholesale line of our business is because it would take me out of it, and it would take that ability to connect with our local agriculture out of it, because we wouldn't be able to source the way that we're sourcing. And the way that we're set up right now is that I'm manufacturing out of my home still, but I have a commercial kitchen downstairs. So what I like to tell people that I have, when I think of my business, I think of us like a local butcher shop. Like we are creating something with resources from our community, and we're giving it back to the community. And that's where we want to be. If we were to grow, it would be a completely different business model that I'm not interested in doing. I really want to stay producing stuff myself. And so that is not something that you hear often. A lot of times with small businesses, and I think there's a lot of pressure to say this, that you want to blow things up, you want to go big, you want to get into all the grocery stores, you want to sell sauce to everybody, you want to be in every home in the world. I think that's what you hear a lot, and I think that's great. If that's really in your heart what you want, then go for it, and I think you can do it. But for me, that's not what I want. I want to give people this gift of something that I've created, and I want to be able to support my family with this business, and that is it. That's my goal. What it takes is, yes, doing some wholesale, because wholesale is so important to me. It's when I can't do the farmer's market, or say when the world shuts down, I need those wholesale accounts. It provides consistent money so that I can, pay regular bills and pay myself and pay my family. So it is totally key to my business, but it's key to do the right amount. When I talked about it at the conference, and I think that this was a little shocking to people, because even like Kat, who runs the conference, I didn't really tell people what had happened. But what had happened during the pandemic is that everything shut down. So I usually sell directly. We do about 70% of our business during holiday at craft sales and online, but mostly at different, sales we're running around town doing. They all got canceled. And so we didn't have that stream of income. So I made the decision to take on wholesale accounts that I would normally not do, but I found a way to do it that felt like it really fit. So I worked with the Heatonist, which is somebody I'd been selling sauce to for a long time. They are wonderful. And also the reason that my business still exists, because I got this really big account from them. I created a special sauce that was just for them. I felt like it still fit in with what I wanted to do. What I didn't know is how hard it was going to be to do it, because I had to produce, I think it ended up being about 18,000 bottles of sauce. And so as everything kept shutting down, I didn't really have help. So I had to do it with me and my husband, and then one friend who was willing to come produce with me. So of course, I would say I ran the numbers and I needed to do it. The numbers piece worked. What didn't work is that I was manufacturing all of those myself in a small kitchen with not the right equipment to get the supplies in, because usually we get, because we are in a residential neighborhood, we get people to bring us stuff. They have a pallet jack, they bring it in for us. It's all great. During COVID, people wouldn't enter our home. So we just had to try to figure it out. And it's, again, like I should have paused and taken a minute and been like, this probably isn't a really good idea. Maybe I should get a pallet jack so I can do this myself. So we tried to move in this 500-pound barrel of vinegar. I hurt myself. I gave myself a hernia, although I didn't know that's what it was at the time, because I couldn't get into any doctors to figure out what's going on. But anyways, we got the barrel in, we made all this sauce, but since we do everything by hand, I was putting the lids on myself, and I dislocated my fingertips. And then that made it so that it was very hard for me to manufacture, but I still continued. I just thought my hands hurt. I didn't really
Right.
know that's what was going on, you know?
That's
I
so entrepreneurial of you. Like, I'm just working really hard. It's totally fine. Everything's going to be fine.
And you know what I kept telling myself is that I'm doing this so that my business survives.
Yeah.
And I'm like lucky to have this account, and I have to just finish it. And then, you know, this was like the very beginning of the pandemic, you know, we weren't really sure what was going to happen. Of course, I didn't think it was going to go on this long. I was like, I'm just going to get this out. I usually take things to a warehouse to have wrapped pallets to ship out. I had to do them all here in my driveway because nobody would let me go into their warehouse because of COVID. We were able to do all of it, create this beautiful sauce, get it safely to New York. And then like I was wrecked, you know, like I couldn't, my body wasn't really functioning. When stuff like that happens, I was very hard on myself. You know, I thought like I had failed. I should have said no, or I should have come up with a different plan, or how can I now keep going and still not really knowing what the world was going to be like. And so that's what I talked about at the conference. I had to take some time and like take care of myself, heal myself, figure out what my plan was going to be, which ended up being to hire people to help me. And then I could do that again, because then we could all get vaccinated and we could be in this small space together. But none of that really could happen. And so where I wasn't set up to do huge amounts of wholesale because that was almost not possible, like not physically possible. I did do it, but I wasn't set up to do that, you know? And then it broke my being, it broke my body because it wasn't what I was set up to do.
Yeah. And so can you, for perspective, tell us like how many bottles you typically make at a time compared to the 18,000 that you just mentioned?
Yeah, like a few hundred. I mean,
Wow.
you know, when you get an order like that, they want it within a few weeks,
Yeah.
maybe, but at the most. A lot of people, if you're like bigger, you have stock all set up and you just ship it out. We're not that kind of business. And the people that we work with know that. We make everything for you to order based on what it is
Yeah.
that you need. Normally, I'll get an order from, say, our local grocery store, and we're sending out a few hundred bottles a week, not thousands of bottles.
Yeah.
So it was a big change, but I had done bigger orders, but not that big.
Yeah.
But also it was the only order that we had. It was the only account that we had that was actively ordering, because what happened with our local grocery stores is that at first they were so busy just trying to stock essentials like toilet paper, you know, rice
Yeah.
and beans, things like that. The smaller kind of specialty accounts at first in the beginning were not a priority. And so we didn't have, orders coming in. Once I was able to connect with our buyers and our people that we knew and be like, hey, is there anything we can do? Like, we need to be able to sell sauce. I'm not doing the farmer's market. Then I had those orders coming in. But at first, a lot of those people that were buyers were either sent home, like kind of temporarily laid off. There was just like a lot of stuff like that was happening. Some of it doesn't really get talked about. But I don't know what other small businesses had to do to like keep things going. But this is just my story. It's what I did. I am glad that I did it. I wish that there would have been a different way to do it. But I still took the time to sit down and analyze the numbers to make sure that it was going to work.
Yeah.
And it did. And it definitely worked. The only thing I would have done different is have more people to help me, but I just, in that moment, I couldn't possibly, because everyone was sent home to quarantine.
Yeah. It was, obviously such a wild time, and it's like so many unknowns. I can't imagine. I was so privileged to be safely here in my home, able to communicate just like I'm communicating with you today. So I had a very, God, I don't know what word is the right word, but I was extremely lucky. And
Yeah.
hearing the stories and sort of like riding the emotional roller coaster a bit with all of the different types of businesses that I work with, from caterers to sauce makers and salsa makers and pasta makers, and everyone's experience was so different. Like,
Yeah.
you, in a sense, like you had an opportunity, right? And to make money, to help you, that it had very, very difficult time that hurt your body very badly. And then we have other folks that like just didn't have an opportunity. at all. And it
Yeah.
just was so varied. It was like, I remember a point in time where it's like, I have no idea how to help. I can't help people like just in one way. I was like, there's nothing even that I can communicate on my like social media, except I'm really sorry about what you're going through. You know what I mean? It was just really, really wild. And I think I'm one of those people who believes that we experience everything to learn a lesson, right? And so I think perhaps, I mean, I'm not going to interpret what your lessons were for you in that, but from the outside, it's like, knowing our limits, but also knowing your strengths, right? Like you got through it and you were committed to it and you did it for your business and your family. And that's, I mean, like commendable, obviously. Thank you for sharing the story.
And the reason I want to share that particular piece is that I was there to talk about self-care at the
Yeah.
conference. And so what I was saying is after you experience something where, we've all experienced this trauma from COVID, we've experienced this big life-changing event, is that we need to process it. We need to talk about it because that's the thing that was hardest is that, yeah, I did it. I got through this thing, but then I needed to like heal myself because I had experienced this thing that was not great. I had physically injured myself and I was very hard on myself mentally. So I needed to process that with somebody, right? So I was there at the conference to say that whatever people did to get through COVID, that we need like complex processing to heal. And that's part of self-care. So you need to talk about what has happened in your experience. And so what I hope is by telling people that this is what I did to survive COVID. It's what I did to have my business survive. And it had consequences. I wouldn't have done it different necessarily because my business did survive. But I just want people to know that sometimes when you take on an account, because maybe I didn't have to take on this account and I just did it in normal times where somebody comes to me and they say, we want you to make this sauce for us. And it fits in with what I want to do. But you really need to look at what that means and if you can do it, because I think that is important. And I see it a lot, especially, so my podcast, we talk to a lot of new businesses, a lot of female owned businesses. I hear a lot of people's stories. Everybody's is different. And I just think that if a wholesale account doesn't work for you in your business right in that moment, that it's okay to say no to that, because I don't think people should ever be producing if they're not making any money. I think sometimes there's this thing that we get, like everybody wants a piece kind of small entrepreneurs. And I feel like sometimes we get talked into things that are, that they want us to do it for, exposure, or it'll get our brand out to the right people or whatever it is. And I think that those things are true. I think that sometimes, yes, that is the case. But I think you can do those things on a very small scale. So if you're looking for exposure, I think you can send somebody sauce that's going to talk about you, and that costs you $30 rather than making a product for like a subscription box company and you're sending them 4,000 bottles of sauce. I think both things are going to give you exposure, but I think, can your business handle that other one? I think that's what you have to look at. For me, no, I can't just make 4,000 bottles of sauce and not make any money, or make 50 cents a bottle or something like that. And that's the thing that I like always try to get people to talk about with wholesale, is that you're making very little money on wholesale, and not everybody understands that. But if I sell my bottle of sauce for $12, then, let's say I'm wholesaling it for $6. So I make half of that. So I make $3 a bottle, and the store is making $12 a bottle. So that's just like a really simple breakdown of like, if it's a 50% all around thing. So not that it is, but just very simply, that's kind of how it works for a small business owner.
Yeah.
So if that's going to be your business model, you have to sell a lot of your product, tons, so much of your product. And
It becomes a volume business.
It becomes a volume business. And there are tons of really great volume businesses, but mine just is not set up to be that way. And it won't be, and I think sometimes for small producers, they get into, they see everybody else in all of these stores and doing all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, I want to get this account. I want to be in this store. And then they start to do the deal and they're like, well, I'm only making 25 cents a bottle on this, but I see everybody else in town doing it. So maybe I'm just going to do it,
Yeah.
and I think that's what happens a lot. And I think that's what happened to me a little bit in the beginning. And then I was like, oh no, like I can't possibly do this. I
Yeah.
can't possibly sell this quantity for this amount of money, or I'm just always going to be making sauce and I'm never going to be able to um, pay anybody. I'm not going to be able to order the supplies I need. And all of those things are super important.
Yeah. And it's very real. Like it's very real. There are businesses today, potentially business owners listening right now who made their first batch of product and they sold it. And all the money that they had then went into making the second batch. Right. And it's this continual cycle that will go on for a long time until the volume gets to a certain point where you're making enough to produce more product and also cover, all of your bills. And I don't want to get into the complex numbers piece of it, but it is not abnormal for people to get into a cycle where you're essentially just making money to produce more product. 99% of the time, people didn't enter into entrepreneurship and starting a food business to get into that cycle.
Sure.
And I think what you said about, if you sell your product wholesale, you're selling it for $6, it cost you, let's say $3 to make. Your profit per unit is $3. That store bought it for $6. They're selling it for $12. They're making $6. I've been thinking so much about this actually since the conference. This was in my head. Like the retail store is always going to make more money than you on your product that you created and that you produced and sold to them. And so like our pricing calculators don't just say, oh, this is how much money you, the business, is going to make. It also shows how much a distributor is going to make or how much the retailer is going to make. So it's there for you in black and white. And more, we're trying to encourage people to say, not necessarily don't do wholesale, because if it's the right fit for you and your business, right, as you're talking about, then do it. But be super informed about how much you need to make in this relationship and don't be afraid to ask for it,
Yeah.
And I just think it's really important. And I'm so glad that you brought that up as a part of today's conversation.
I guess I want people to hear that and feel like they have the power to pause and look at numbers and see if it's going to work. Because if it's going to work for you, great. Like I love when people get into a new store and it works for them.
Yeah.
And I don't want to discourage anyone from doing wholesale. I
Yeah.
don't want people to hear that. But what I want to hear is that it's okay to stop and look at the numbers, and also that it's okay to say no. And don't say yes just because you see other people saying yes, because maybe they have a reason why it works for them. And sometimes that comes down to like whatever kind of deal you're making with that place. So anytime you have a new wholesale account, you have to think of it as like a deal that you're making, because if sometimes they'll mark it up at a different price. The stores will mark it up at a different price. And we don't work with distributors, and not that I think distributors and brokers are great if you have a bunch of product you need to sell. I think they're great. I think they sell it for you. You have your stuff all over the place. They're moving it around. They take a commission, as they should. They're doing a job. They're transporting it. They're getting you these accounts. But is that commission going to work for you?
Yeah.
And if you aren't looking to sell thousands of units, then I think it's okay to say no to a distributor. And if a store says, we can't let you in here without a distributor, so many times I just say, okay, cool. It's fine. This just isn't going to work. I love your store. Great. It's okay to do that. And we've had to do that a lot, especially for like specialty food stores in other states, because they want to use a distributor that's going to deliver it to them. They deal with a lot of the inventory. They deal with, payment.
Yeah.
It is very great for stores to use distributors, but for a small business of my size, it just doesn't work for me.
Yeah. So it seems early on, you knew you wanted your business to be rooted in the region, even the state per se that you are from, connected to your farmers, and you wanted to have a relationship to a certain degree with the folks that were buying your product. And I think it's safe to say that then you made decisions based on that core vision and mission, which I think is really important. That, it sounds, I think, I don't want to say frou-frou or like, you know, woo woo, as some people say, but like you have to have a solid vision. You have to have a solid mission that like you, that really connects with you as an individual, right? That like feels like it has meaning to you, because then I think it creates that clear path for you, makes it really easy for you to say, yes, this aligns with what we're trying to do, or no, this doesn't align with what we're trying to do. And like taking on wholesale accounts, it's not that it's a hard no.
Yeah.
It's, is this the right partner for us? And can they work with us in the way that we need to work in order to make enough money to remain in business? Before we run out of time, I want to talk about the other parts of your business, because you have a cookbook, which came out a few years ago. I remember I was working at a retail store. I was the buyer there in LA when your book came out, and I didn't meet you that day, but you did a book signing there. I don't think I ever told you that actually, but I saw you once the year that your book came out. And you also do cooking classes, and that's a big part of what you do. So can you tell us, how those two things became a part of your, overarching business model, and why?
Yeah, I think so I've always liked to teach. So even when I did social work, I did a lot of like group teaching with whether it's kids or parents or things like that. So I've loved teaching canning. So in the beginning of having the business, I started teaching canning classes right away. And so that was a good way for me to not only, you know, have income coming in, because I do make money off the classes, but I also had to look at that. When I first did classes, I charged $20 and I definitely was not making any money. And I was like, I just want to keep canning alive. I want to do
Yeah.
this. But then as I got busier as a business owner, I was like, okay, I actually have to think of this too as part of my business. And so I did. And so I had to look at how much money I was spending, how much I really needed to charge people, and then did that. So my classes have, from the very first year I did them, they have changed because I couldn't really do that. And first, the people that were coming to my classes were all people that I knew. And so it was like my friends anyways. And so they're like, yeah, we'll bring $20 and then I could buy the supplies. We drink some wine, like whatever.
Yeah.
It was fine. But then, as that changed, as I had taught classes to all the people that I knew, and then I needed to do it as like, I had to think of it as a business. So that's one thing that I want people to hear too, is that you'll always hear, your time is valuable, and pay yourself what you're worth, or charge what you're worth. And I think that's hard for people to do, because it's like, oh, I don't know, like, I just want to do it. If you're a giving person, you just want to do everything for free. But I think if you just take yourself out of it and you just think of it just like a product. So I think of it as a bottle of sauce. So how much am I going to spend to make a profit for the business? What do I need to charge? And that's much different than looking at it as, how much is my time worth? How much am I going to pay myself? I think that's really hard for people to do. So I think it's easier that if you're doing something that's a service, you need to look at it just like you would anything else in your business. So that's what I had to do for my classes. So I teach classes now. I did them through Airbnb experience for a very long time. And how that works is that if people book an Airbnb, then they're recommended something to do in the city. And so I was doing canning classes. We were doing sauce tastings here, private sauce tastings, and then vegan cooking classes. So that was pre-pandemic. That became a big part of my income. So that, of course, all ended because people weren't Airbnb traveling, and we weren't having people come into the kitchen because it was our production space and into our home. We just brought those back, which is great. So that piece of my business has picked back up, but that was like another piece that I had lost during the pandemic. So I hadn't done them for 2 years, but now I'm back to doing that. The book, that's a little different. If you're thinking about like financials of like writing a book, I would say I wouldn't build it into your business model. I don't know, everybody's book is different. Maybe for, if you're like a celebrity or chef or something, maybe you sell tons of books. But the book for me was something that I had been approached by a publishing company, and then pitched a book idea, and then they wanted to go a different direction. I had already put all that time into doing the book, so I got an agent who then pitched the book. So somebody else kind of manages that piece of it. But yeah, that's the book writing piece. I know sometimes people want to write a book as part of their maybe business model, or think that it will be another way to bring in income. For me, that wasn't the case. It didn't bring me any income, but it was cool, and I got to go around and talk to people about it. And I'm really proud of the book, and it helps for my canning classes to draw more people to that. So in that aspect, yes. But it's just another one of those financial decisions. You have to decide if it's worth it.
Yeah. And I think there's one more piece of, maybe not of Marshall's hot sauce, like in terms of the technical financial or like tax way that things fall into your business model, but you also do recipe development, if I'm not mistaken.
I do. Yeah. So I do recipe development sometimes for companies. Usually I get approached by people that want to add something spicy to their line, is like that product development. That's how I get those kinds of jobs. So spicy products that I've developed would be spicy wine, spicy honey, things like that. I'll do them for companies. Sometimes I am part of that, like they're using me as part of the marketing. So it'll be like, Sarah Marshall developed this recipe for us. Sometimes I sign like an NDA that, I wrote this recipe for you in secret. And that is fine.
No one knows. Yeah.
That's the product development piece. Sometimes I'll do recipe writing for maybe another food company or a spice company where I'm writing recipes for how to cook with the food. So that's another piece that ends up being part of my business. But it all sort of comes naturally. I don't like seek out those opportunities. It's usually people approaching me, but I have it up that like, hey, I do this if you ever need it.
Yeah. Well, you enjoy it and you're good at it. Right. And I think that that's another like point to sort of like pause on for a second and connect to that mission and vision. Is also something we talk about on the podcast a lot, is how do you want your business to exist in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you run the business or does the business run you? And it seems like, I'm sure there are periods of time where you're like exhausted because you had to do so many things in a week. And, it's human to, overschedule ourselves, right? Every now and again, or often. But I think my perception of how you've structured your life and your business is that you enjoy all the pieces of the work that you do. And so I think that is another thing for people to hear a food business owner say, and to know that it's possible. And you're, and I don't mean to put this on you if you don't want it, but it seems you're building a business on your own terms. And I really want people to be empowered to do that. And I can only do that through the numbers with them to show them how things are possible. And I think you are an example of how it can look, one way it could look for a business. And I just think it's really wonderful that you're sharing.
I hope that it helps people to see that, but I will say that it takes constant checking in with yourself, with your business, with, for me, it's with my husband. And, when we started the business and as we've started to move through the business, it's always that we do this so that we can raise our daughter, so that we can be together. We met working together, I don't know, 20 years ago or something, a long time ago, but we've always liked to be together. We've always liked to work together. And so that's what we want.
Yeah.
That's not what everybody wants, but that's what we want. And so it's like, we want to be able to make a schedule that if our daughter needs to do something, we can take her to do it, that we can pick her up from school, that we can spend time together, that we can go out of town, so that we can live our life.
Yeah.
Sometimes that does mean that when we're super busy, we're working a lot. Over the pandemic, I was working crazy hours and days. So I don't want people to think that it's like this glamorous life. We work all the time, especially having, our business in our home, but we're making that conscious choice to work when it works for us. And when we have accounts come in, and when we don't have stuff going on, we can just hang and be chill. It's like, we just try to have a good balance of it. And if something feels overwhelming and crazy, then it's like, hey, whoa, we need to look at it. I need to either have somebody come in because I'm staying up till 2 o'clock bottling things or putting labels on things or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's not how we want it to be. So what do we need to change? And I think that's just the part I hope too that people can hear, is that your business is always going to be shifting and moving and changing. And I think what I've tried to do is find things that I get joy out of. And if somebody wants to pay me to do them, awesome. I want that. I love to teach people. I love to come up with creative recipe ideas. And I think that's why I'm good at that piece, is just because I have that, counseling background. So I can hear what people really want and what they want for their product line. And I can do that. And then when they're stoked on it, I'm excited about it. And that's why I like to do those kinds of recipe development things. It's why I like to teach people. When people send me pictures of what they're canning at home, like, I'm so excited, like I taught them how to do that. They wouldn't have done that. That was like what I wanted to do in the very beginning, was like keep this canning and producing locally alive. And so I'm doing that. So not all of that comes out of my sauce business, but I've definitely built it in because that's where I find my joy and my purpose is through that.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. If folks want to follow you on social media, where can they find you?
So Instagram, I'm Spicy Marshall, same on Twitter. We also have our sauce one, which is Marshall's Haute sauce. So you can find me there, and on our website, all those links are built into that.
Amazing. And I'm guessing that people can sign up for, do you do virtual classes?
I don't do virtual canning classes. I really like to do it in person. But if people are ever traveling, know that you can come do it here. I do like these cooking videos of how to cook with whatever's in season on my Instagram TV channel. So you can always check that out and follow along and watch.
Amazing. Well, Sarah, you are a bit of an inspiration, or perhaps a big inspiration to me, if I'm being honest, and I think to other business owners as well. And I wish we could all find the courage to tap into what we really want and then do the work to make it happen. So thank you for sharing your story today. I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was nice to be here with you today.
Thank you for joining Sarah Marshall and I today for this episode of the Good Food CFO podcast. If you're interested in continuing the conversation around building a business on your own terms and creating a mission and vision for your business that's all your own, I encourage you to join us inside the free Profitable Food Business Community. Visit profitablefoodbusinesscommunity.mn.co to join. We also are sharing the link in the show notes. Thank you again for joining us. I'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.